Welcome to Relationship Helpers. This is your host, Vincent Ketchy. I have a confession to make. I have not always been a good dater. I've not always been a good date for my spouse. There have been times when I have not put my spouse's feelings ahead of mine. There have been times when I have been maybe overeager, maybe bringing too many flowers. Maybe at times when I didn't bring enough flowers. At times maybe when I didn't have her interest in mind on the restaurant I chose or the activities that we did. There have been times when maybe I wasn't in the right mood or just not a very entertaining person to be with. Or there's been times when I've forgotten important dates, important times that maybe I shouldn't have. Or there's been times maybe I've been a little bit too eager, maybe the time when I stopped and got some certs on the way back from the date. Maybe that was a little too overzealous or optimistic in a certain time. But anyway, hopefully, so Laura and myself will be talking about dating your spouse. What are healthy dates? When to date? How long to date? The frequency of dating your spouse and how to set boundaries there so that you have healthy dates and that you grow your relationship. So I hope that this is a helpful episode for you. So we want to talk today about date night. What comes to mind when you hear date night? What do you think of?
Embarrassing stories, movies that are about dates.
Well, yeah, I think about that. A lot of people, I think, movies come up. Like, let's go to the movies and let's go out to eat, something like that. Definitely going out to eat comes up. I can think for myself, if I think about my parents, we would, which I wouldn't really qualify this as a date necessarily. It was more of like a family night, but every Friday we would go eat at the fish camp, and that's where we would go. It started out one fish camp, and if y'all don't know, in the South, a fish camp is a fish restaurant, usually where they deep fry fish, and you'll get flounder, catfish, or whichever one that you prefer that's deep fried, and there's coleslaw, and, well, that's a fish camp. So we would always go to the fish camp.
Don't neglect the hush puppies.
Well, yeah, the hush puppies are very good at a fish camp. So we would go and do this, and so when I think date night, this was kind of my parents' date night. Of course, they took us along, though, which is really wouldn't qualify. We would go to the fish camp, and of course, my brother and myself, we didn't like fish. We were little kids. We didn't like fish. I'm, 5, 6 years old, however young. We would get Wendy's or something like that. Definitely not fish. And then afterwards,
parents, don't listen to this. This is not advice.
Right. Well, and then afterwards, we would go walk around the mall for about 30 minutes after we ate our fish or whatever, we ate. So that was kind of... You
mean until your dad got tired of walking around the mall?
Right, yeah, Mom. Well, no, Dad usually would sit on the bench at the mall and watch people walk around the mall and that kind of thing. Occasionally, instead of the fish, instead of the fish camp, we would go to K&W, which is a cafeteria, which is really good, but it also has fish as well. But that's something that comes to my mind when I think of date night, at least when I think of my parents.
So did these experiences inform your choices to how you would date later on in life? That's my question.
I don't know. I do like fish, and I do feel that to make a good date, usually you eat. That's my mind. You go and you eat together.
I'm counting in my head how many times we've been to K&W now.
Well, it is good, yes. That's some good. How about yourself, Laura? What do you think of when you hear date night?
I just think of awkwardness.
Okay. So you're talking about our dates.
No, I don't think that ours have been terribly awkward. I mean, when I look back on our dates, in fact, I think our dates are maybe a little more business-like than they should be.
Okay, all right. So we're talking more about, what do you mean? Finances?
Finances, work.
Oh, work.
So essentially what I'm hearing from both your experiences with going with your parents on their unofficial date nights and our date nights is it seems like we have different expectations of what a date night looks like. Maybe for your parents, that was the closest they got to date night. I don't know. Bringing the kids along.
Well, it was a different time. Back then, people really didn't go out to eat very much.
Okay.
So that is a little bit different.
So that was like a once-a-week thing.
It was kind of a once-a-week thing, so that's a little bit different, I guess, than now. It seems like everybody goes out to eat
pretty frequently.
Pretty frequently throughout the weekday, not just on the weekends.
Mm-hmm. So I guess it's also important to note that a date doesn't have to be specific to eating. It seems like we've focused a lot on that so far. So
right.
When we talk about date night and date night ideas today, we're not going to make it specific to eating. We're going to have other ideas as well.
Okay, so let's talk about some categories. These are some things to help define what a date night is, what a healthy date night is. I know for my couples, so I mainly do marriage counseling, and my couples, when they come in, one of my first homework assignments is to go out on a date. And I have to define this for people, what a date is.
Yeah, some people really, I noticed this with my own counseling, that some people struggle with just the concept of a date.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What is a healthy date? What would be a good date?
Well, I think to each his own. I think that each couple needs to define that for themselves, and that's why we're doing this topic today. We can't give you a specific formula that is going to work perfectly for you, because one person's date night could be at home, but very specific. You know, right. You could be very intentional about what you do at home. You know, with the kids in bed asleep already. Yeah.
Right, the activities.
Yeah. As opposed to, somebody else may have to leave their home and maybe even leave their town to feel like they're going on a date.
Okay.
So that's up to you as a couple to define. You need to decide where you two as a couple feel best, most comfortable, where you both can enjoy your time together.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be necessarily going out, although sometimes that may be preferable to change the environment to create more of a date-like environment, going out somewhere else, somewhere
right.
Maybe that's romantic, where...
And I'll speak for stay-at-home parents. I know that a lot, and I work a lot with stay-at-home mothers, but I know there's plenty of stay-at-home fathers out there as well. Sometimes you need that distance from your workplace. For a stay-at-home parent, your workplace is your home.
Okay, right.
So removing yourself from that environment so that you can be an adult again.
Well, but there's so many that aren't just stay-at-home. I mean, okay, yes, they're stay-at-home parents, but there's actually
work-at-home parents.
Work-at-home,
yeah, or work-at-home adults.
Right, where
yes.
both of them maybe work at home, so they really need to get out of that environment so that it's not so
stagnant.
Business-like.
Yeah,
or stagnant.
So it's up to you to make that decision.
Right. So the date experience is more about the atmosphere and maybe the boundaries that's put around it to create this date-like atmosphere.
That's right. So it's probably important that the couple sits down and actually fleshes this out. Talk about it.
Mm-hmm. So talking about the expectations that each have for a date.
Right.
Right. So let's go into this first... let's talk about we talked about it doesn't have to be anything necessarily specific, but what would be, I guess, the duration? What's a healthy duration for a date night?
Well, I know, Vincent, that you and I with our marriage counseling often recommend having a date night about once a week.
Okay, yeah, the frequency. Yes.
So if we look at frequency, once a week is ideal. However, I would suggest that if you're kind of unconventional, like if you're able to have a date day sometime during the month, that might change things up. You may not have a date night once a week. If you have a date afternoon or a date day, that's a longer amount of time.
So it's a longer time that you can spend with each other.
Right.
But I guess for myself, when I'm telling couples, usually I do recommend once a week. That just seems to be a good time to
kind of touch base.
Yeah, touch base with each other and kind of reconnect with each other and make sure that there's an extended period of time of reconnection. I feel like if you're going to do it weekly, then it needs to at least be, minimum of 2 hours. Preferably more like 3 or 4 hours that is spent just the two
devoted to themselves as a couple.
So this is just the two, just the couple there, the man and the wife, spending time with each other, whether it's eating, whether it's doing an activity.
Or both.
Right. And many times it, of course, involves a lot of conversation where you can really connect with each other.
Which brings up another important thing that we need to discuss, which is the boundaries around conversation in a date. One person may feel that it's important that all of the week's business be discussed in the date, where the other may not feel that way. I know that's something you and I have to kind of tackle.
Right, so that will be something as far as like limiting what the conversation should be about. If there's some issues that bring in stress, if it's business, if it's finances, if it's family, or if it's children, if it's disciplining children, if that is, a hot button issue, then those issues, there should be a better time, another time maybe
set aside specific to that.
Specifically for those hot button issues where you can talk about it, sit down, hey, we're going to talk about this right now. We're going to deal with this issue here over maybe their parents. Maybe their parents are getting older and how to deal with that, the in-laws. Or maybe it's discipline with the kids, dealing with that. But setting aside another specific time, which you could call it family business, I guess.
Okay.
So instead of date night.
Because date night's really all about nurturing you as a couple.
Right. So the conversation for date night should be about learning about each other, how they're actually doing.
Okay.
Where they're at. Are they learning? Are they learning about different things? Are they learning about different things at work? What has intrigued them? Where are their interests? What things have sparked their curiosity in a certain area where there can be some deeper talk and even talks about the past and talks about the future.
Okay, so dreaming.
Yes, dreaming together. What do you see as some other healthy conversations during date night?
Well, I think to kind of piggyback on the dreaming thing, talk about some things that you want to do in the future as a couple or as a family vacations you may want to go on, trips you may want to go on, places you want to see, things you want to do with your family and your kids.
Okay, things you would like to do. And then also, as I was talking about, some things if you're reading, talking about books that you've been reading. Now, I know there's not everyone's a reader. It may be talking about movies that you've seen that kind of sparked interest in. Or it may be talking about going to church, something the pastor had said.
This could get into some deep spiritual things as well.
Right. That would be very healthy.
It may be something like, hey, today I was reading my devotion, X, Y, and Z. What did you think? What do you think about that? Or this really touched me when I read this Bible verse. Or I was thinking about the story of insert Bible figure here. You could put a Bible, you can, think of someone in the Bible and how you may be relating to that person's experiences at the moment or something.
Right, so these conversations should be not about necessarily hot button issues. Now, if the button's not a hot button, then you could, of course, talk about, what's going on in the family, or talking about the kids. How do you think they're developing? What's going on? Do you feel like, little Junior here is doing well in that? How can we encourage Junior a little bit more? How can we approach this situation more? Which may be a good time to talk about that and find out what's appropriate, what's healthy for.
It may be a good time to talk about that, or it also may be a good time to decide that you're going to talk about that later.
Right. Well, that may be.
Yeah.
So we've talked about duration. So a duration, just to give kind of an idea, should be generally, if it's going to be a once a week type date, generally the duration is maybe 2 to 4 hours. It doesn't have to include eating, but many times it does include eating. But one thing that it must include is conversation. So it can be an activity. It could be going on a walk. It could be going on a canoe ride. It could be going ice skating. It could be
going to the park.
Yeah, going to the park. Could be staying in and, giving each other massages.
Or you could splurge and get a couple's massage somewhere else and have a professional do it for you.
You could do that. So generally once a week, 2 to 4 hours. And what I really recommend is that it's a certain day that is set aside as a when the date is. So if it's going to be Friday, make it Friday. If it's going to be Monday, make it on Monday. Make it on whatever day that you can put these boundaries around. You can set aside and say, hey, this is when we're going to reconnect together. We're going to set aside this time just for the two of us, and not let anything else take up, like business or time with the kids or time with the in-laws or church or whatever else that could take up that time.
I like the use of that word reconnect. I think that that's something that you and I as therapists see a lot of, and that is couples who have become disconnected. They've gotten so busy and almost like their own independent lives that they lose sight of their couplehood.
Right. So the family kind of crowds it out, or work may be crowding out, the pressures of work, the pressures of finances, or family, the kids.
Well, and the couple forgets how to have fun together. They forget how to be just a couple.
So they forget how to just enjoy their interaction with each other.
Right.
Well, speaking of interaction with each other, Laura, I have a question for you.
I'm on the spot here.
Okay. So when
the beads of sweat are trickling down my forehead as he asks.
So now, when we say date night, I don't know for how many of you this may come to mind, but I'm going to ask Laura, does this mean sex?
Remember earlier in the podcast, we were discussing how we need to sit down and have conversations before we actually go through with the date and discuss our expectations.
Right.
This is part of that. I think that it's a good conversation to have. I would not want to be a barrier to spontaneous sex, though, because I think spontaneity can be very good. I wouldn't take sex off the table. I do think it's a conversation that should be had, because I think one partner may be going into this thinking that sex is going to be the clear outcome of, or the ending of, or kind of like the cherry on top for the end of the date night.
So they could have that in their mind, that it's not a good date unless they end with sex.
Some could have that expectation. And I hate to say it, I think more men would maybe expect that than women, but I'm not going to say that's completely true of all one gender. I'm not saying that, folks.
Okay, so it shouldn't always be equated, date night shouldn't always be equated as sex night.
Right, although I'm not saying that it's off the table.
Right. Okay, so it depends on how the date goes. So if the date goes really well with conversation and reconnecting, then many times it may end with sex.
It could.
Okay. To recap, to define a healthy date, frequency should be, I would say, weekly. Doesn't always have to be weekly, depending on your schedule, but usually that works best.
It should be intentional, whatever the case.
It should be intentional when it is. It should last about 2 to 4 hours. It should involve lots of conversations. And one thing I didn't mention is it should involve getting rid of your phone, not having your phone interrupt or any of these devices or TV or things like that.
And you're welcome to reference our podcast episode from earlier. That's the 5 behaviors that break down a conversation, and you'll find plenty of information on how devices distract us.
Right. And so this date night should have boundaries around it, to where there's not these interactions, but whether it's healthy conversation where you can reconnect as a couple.
That's right. The emphasis should be on connection.
And talking about that, what the expectations of a date is very healthy.
Which, Vincent, I know you and I both in our marriage therapy practice make it a point to recommend that the husband be the one to initiate date nights.
Yes, I do recommend that many times. Not that the wife doesn't have a part in it, but that the husband takes the initiative to at least plan out that time, to set aside that time, and to make sure that it is something that the wife enjoys, of course, that the husband enjoys as well. And many times it may be going to something that the interest one and not necessarily the other. And maybe even going back and forth. One date be something that interests the man, and the next date be something that interests the woman, where they're actually learning more about each other, so that they're actually becoming deeper involved with each other's personalities and understandings and interests and loves.
I like to tell my couples this, and I'll use Vincent as an example, that because I'm married to Vincent, I will always be in the class Vincent 101. I'm taking Vincent 101. And so when I go on a date or I interact with Vincent, I should be learning about him. and applying what I learn about him to the rest of our interactions.
Right, and vice versa. So I'm, of course, in class 101, Laura 101, and that involves learning lots and lots about theater, which I know nothing about, but I'm learning tons about. I never knew much about it before. But anyway, I hope that this was helpful to you, learning about what date night is and understanding what a healthy date night is. Please give us feedback if you've got questions or comments about this message.
Thank you for joining us today on Relationship Helpers. It is our hope that you gained some valuable information. For the show notes and more information on today's topic, please visit www.relationshiphelpers.net. Again, that is www.relationshiphelpers.net. If you enjoyed our show, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review. If you had questions or concerns about our show, please let us know about this as well by going to our website, www.relationshiphelpers.net. Thanks again and have a blessed week. Note that accuracy and authority in regards to the subject matter covered today is not a replacement for professional care. Neither the host, the clinicians, or the guests are rendering clinical or other professional advice. Seek professional help if you need it.